Hello and welcome to the 2021 Dyslexia Awareness Training and Other Related Disorders. I'm Laurie Weathersby, and today I have with me Jada Brantley as we are going to go over the information for dyslexia that we will share with you over the next 2 hours. First, I will share the vision and mission of the Mississippi Department of Education. And the vision is to create a world-class educational system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce, and to flourish as parents and citizens. The mission is to provide leadership through the development of policy and accountability systems so that all students are prepared to compete in the global community. The State Board of Education has 6 strategic plan goals. The first goal is that all students proficient in showing growth in all assessed areas. Number 2, every student graduates from high school and is ready for college and career. 3, every child has access to a high-quality early childhood program. 4, every school has effective teachers and leaders. 5, every community effectively uses a world-class data system to improve student outcomes. 6, every school and district is rated C or higher. For our agenda today, we're going to share the presenter information with you. We'll go over our session details. We will define dyslexia. We'll go over the relevant legislation, characteristics of dyslexia, supports that you can put in place in the classroom. We'll do a quick review, and then we will also have our available resources. So first, I am Laurie Weathersby. I'm a licensed dyslexia therapist, a certified academic language therapist. I'm the Bureau Director of the Office of Intervention Services here at the Mississippi Department of Education, and I have over 20 years experience in education. We also have Jada Brantley here with us today. She is a licensed dyslexia therapist, a certified academic language therapist. She is the academic intervention specialist at the Mississippi Department of Education, and she has over 25 years in education. So the purpose of this training is the Department of Ed shall require school districts to conduct 4 hours of awareness training for dyslexia and other related disorders to all licensed educators and paraprofessionals responsible for instruction. Standards 1 and 2 of the International Dyslexia Association's Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teachers of Reading, the 2018 edition, shall be the minimum content used for the dyslexia training. So you will see us refer to KPS throughout the session today, and that is referring to the Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teachers of Reading. The knowledge and practice standards of teaching of reading are used to guide the preparation of those who teach reading and related literacy skills. And this can be done through whole group instruction, targeted instruction, and intensive intervention. These standards can be used by individuals who are teaching reading to all students. And feel free to refer to the Mississippi MTSS 3-tiered instructional model if you need more specific guidance on the 3-tiered levels of supports. Okay, so if you have not located the handout on our dyslexia website, feel free to pause the video now, print the handout because you will need it as we go through the session today. Have a pen, a pencil, maybe a highlighter ready, and we really encourage you to set time aside to actively listen and participate. The goal of this session is to give you that background knowledge of dyslexia So as you're working with students, you are able to provide the necessary strategies and accommodations that they need to be successful. Okay, so if you now have your session 1 handout, when you look at the top, look at letter A, list one thing you think of when you hear the word dyslexia. And then letter B, what do you plan to gain from this session? And if you need to take a minute to pause the video, feel free to do that at this time. Okay, before I hand it over to Jada to go over the overview portion of the session, I just wanted to reiterate that this came about because of the 2021 legislative session where they provided the information for schools and districts to receive the Dyslexia Awareness Training. And so we are very excited to provide this information with you. And of course, as always, if you have questions, as you are listening to the session, please take notes and please feel free to email us. We will have our email addresses available at the end. And so we really encourage you to make this a thought-provoking time. So as you have questions, or if it makes you, consider some students that maybe you have and you're not sure how to approach certain strategies, feel free to reach out to us, and we are here to support you. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jada.
Okay, we are going to discuss the International Dyslexia Association's 2003 version of the definition of dyslexia. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So, what do we mean about neurological in origin? Brain imagery studies have shown that dyslexia is neurologically based. These neuroimaging studies have examined brain anatomy and function of people with dyslexia and people without dyslexia. It has been determined that people with dyslexia have not developed the neural network in the brain that is typical of successful readers. Okay, let's discuss the phonological component in language that was mentioned in the definition. So phonology is the study of the speech sound system in the brain. So let's think of it as it applies to spoken language. When listening, it is the ability to identify and distinguish phonemes. When speaking, it is the appropriate use of phonological patterns. Now think about it as it applies to written language. Reading. So when one is reading, it is the understanding of letter sound associations. And when writing, it is the ability to spell accurately. All right, taking a closer look at some of the things mentioned, impairment of learning that may affect one or more academic area, but not others. So students with dyslexia might struggle in the area of reading in the classroom. However, through my years of working with students with dyslexia, I can tell you from experience that some of my students weren't necessarily struggling in the subject of reading or language arts or English in high school. They struggled in mathematics, for example. So some students will have difficulties in other subjects. It might be that the impairment shows itself in foreign language classes. All right, structural and functional difference in the brain. So we discussed that a moment ago. Difficulties with reading print accurately with a rate that supports comprehension. So when students are trying so hard to decode words, to identify words accurately, and all of their, let's say, brain power is using, they're using it all to accurately identify words, then that fluency will suffer, which can impede that comprehension. Difficulty using phonics and structural analysis to spell and read unknown words automatically. The core deficit in phonological processing skills, speech sounds are poorly processed. It is unexpected in relation to intelligence, opportunities, and instruction. So students who have dyslexia might have been immersed in literacy from day one, but that's not what causes the dyslexia. Lack of immersion or students who have been immersed, these students can all have dyslexia, no matter what their background. Exists in individuals with talents and abilities that enable them to be successful in many domains. So there are so many people out there with dyslexia who have been very successful actors, successful musicians, successful artists, successful business owners. So having dyslexia does not stop one from being able to succeed. It coexists with other developmental difficulties and disabilities, including problems with attention, memory, and executive function. Many students with dyslexia also struggle with attention issues, attention deficit disorder, that executive functioning piece. So they will struggle with things such as organizational skills, being able to follow multi-step directions, being able to recall something that was just told to them, being able to say it back to you correctly. There are some myths about dyslexia, and we want to go ahead and clear those up. So myth number one, dyslexia causes letters or words to appear backward or out of order. So that is not true. Myth number two, dyslexia is related to problems with vision. Myth number three, dyslexia is a sign of below average intelligence. Remember, we have identified that students with dyslexia are typically average or above average in intelligence. Dyslexia is a condition that can be cured, or dyslexia will go away over time. This is not true, as once a person is diagnosed with dyslexia, they always have dyslexia. It might be that we see the characteristics, or we do not see the characteristics being as evident once a person has participated in intervention or really intensive instruction to aid in that support towards dyslexia. So for example, if a child is in dyslexia therapy, we may not notice the signs of dyslexia like we would have before therapy, but the dyslexia does not go away. All right, let's talk about the legislation. We have had a couple changes in the legislation, which of course Laurie mentioned. Part of that change is this mandated training that we are currently participating in. All right, so let's read from House Bill 754. Local school districts are to make an initial determination of whether a student diagnosed with dyslexia meets the eligibility criteria under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to have an individualized education program developed to receive service. If the diagnosis does not meet the eligibility requirements for an IEP, the district must proceed to determine a student's eligibility for a 504 plan. So this is a change in the wording of the legislation. Okay, If a student qualifies for an IEP, annual goals are created. These goals are measurable academic and/or functional goals that are written to meet the child's needs that result from the child's disability, to enable the child to be involved in and progress in the general education curriculum and meet each of the child's other educational needs that result from the child's disability. So when creating these goals, we have to keep in mind that these goals should be meaningful, they should be understandable, and our goal is that they can be accomplished within 1 year. If at any time a parent feels that a child's goals are not being achieved at an adequate rate, or the parent has other concerns, he or she has the right to ask for an IEP meeting. If at some point a parent has a grievance that cannot be resolved at the local school or local district level, then the parent does have the right to request due process. Okay, so a due process hearing can be made, or excuse me, a request for a due process hearing can be made to the Mississippi Department of Education's Office of Special Education. But again, we always want to try to resolve any issues or grievances at that local level initially. Okay, let's talk about public school requirements for students who have a diagnosis of dyslexia. Okay, public schools are to adopt a local board policy about screening their students for dyslexia. They have to screen all of their students in kindergarten and first grade. So those kindergarten students will be screened second semester of kindergarten, and first grade students will be screened the first semester of first grade. And the screening has to be administered or completed with a State Board of Education approved dyslexia screener. The screener has to include phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, sound symbol recognition, alphabet knowledge, decoding skills, encoding skills, and rapid naming. If a student does not pass the screener, then parents must be notified. Schools have to accept dyslexia evaluations that were administered by a licensed psychologist, psychometrist, or speech-language pathologist. Okay? Schools have to determine whether a student diagnosed with dyslexia qualifies under IDEA before proceeding to the development of a 504 plan. If a student's diagnosis of dyslexia does not result in a disability determination, then in developing the written 504, there shall be a presumption that proficiency in spelling, reading, and writing are essential for the student to achieve appropriate educational progress. All right, when districts are developing interventions, intervention strategies should be provided. Accommodations should be provided also that will enable the student to achieve appropriate educational progress. The interventions and strategies developed shall include, but not limited to, the use of the 3-tier instructional model and the utilization of provisions of the IDEA and Section 504 to address those needs. All right, back to some information about the required screener. This year, this current school year, 2021-22, first grade students must be screened by October 22nd. Kindergarten students must be screened by April the 15th of 2022. Districts are to complete the Mississippi Dyslexia Screener data information form and submit that information to the Office of Intervention Services. That needs to be submitted by May 6th, 2022. And that screener information and forms can be accessed on the MDE website at this link. This is simply a screenshot of what the form looks like that will be submitted containing that information about the screener. This is a sample parent letter that districts can use when a student does not pass the screener, to notify the family. This letter may be used, or this letter may be simply used kind of as a guidance as you create your own letter. It is not required that this particular letter be used, but it is available for you for a resource. Okay, when determining intervention supports, while the law specifically states that intervention strategies and accommodations must be provided to enable the student to achieve appropriate educational progress, the interventions and strategies are determined locally. Okay, so we must provide those interventions and those accommodations when needed so that the student can achieve that appropriate educational progress. But again, that is to be determined locally at the local school or district. All right, things for districts to consider when looking at their data on students with dyslexia. How many students that failed the screener were referred to MTSS? How many students who failed the screener were referred to MET? How many of those students were eligible for special education services? How many students failed that screener who were in kindergarten and then again in first grade? When making decisions about students, are we considering multiple sources of data? So we're looking at multiple data points. Has the parent been notified, or has the parent expressed concern regarding their student and dyslexia? All right, we're going to look at session 1 handout now. We're on part C. So where can you go to find if a student failed the dyslexia screener in kindergarten or first grade? If you want to pause the video now and take a moment to review your answers or have a discussion, you may do that. Speaking of the Dyslexia Screener, we mentioned that schools must utilize one that has been approved by the State Board of Education. These are the currently approved screeners. So the first one is Amplify. This is a new screener that was added the last time the RFQ was released. So Amplify has another one that was previously on the list. They are both listed here. The one previously added to the list was Amplify M-Class with Acadians. The one recently added is M-Class with Dibble's 8th edition. So Amplify has two on the approved list. There's Dibble's 8th edition from the University of Oregon Center on Teaching and Leading. There's Fast Bridge Learning from Illuminate Education. Lexercise, the Mississippi Dyslexia Screener. And if you utilize Lexercise, you just have to make sure that you are choosing Mississippi Dyslexia Screener on that website. There's the Mississippi College Dyslexia Screener for K1, 2, and 3. So this one has a piece for those students above first grade. And then the William Carey Mississippi Dyslexia Therapy Association Screener. Truthfully, any of these screeners can be utilized for students who are above first grade, although it's not a requirement. If you have concerns or questions about students, you can utilize these screeners to give you great information. I've even utilized screeners for students, high school students, honestly, and it gives you good information about those basic skills. Some distinguishing characteristics of dyslexia. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity says that approximately 20% of the population is affected by dyslexia. So think about that in the terms of the number of students in your classroom and what 20% of those students looks like. There are students who are in our classrooms who might have dyslexia who are not diagnosed. The impact that dyslexia has is different for each person and depends on the severity of the condition and the effectiveness of instructional remediation. The impact of dyslexia on a person's life can change throughout their life. As a dyslexia therapist, I can tell you that so many of my students were different. Not one of them was just like the other. And you know, dyslexia is on a continuum. There's mild, moderate, severe dyslexia. And as I mentioned earlier, if a student has been in therapy, for example, you may not even notice those characteristics as much. And then, of course, the impact that we mention here, you know, the impact that dyslexia has on a child in kindergarten or first grade or second grade is going to look totally different than the impact that it has on a young adult who is of college age or someone in the workforce. Some characteristics of dyslexia in the preschool years: trouble learning common nursery rhymes, difficulty learning names of letters in the alphabet, unable to recognize letters in his or her own name, mispronounces familiar words, does not recognize rhyming patterns, and a family history of reading difficulties, as dyslexia is familial. Some of the things on this checklist that stand out to me as a therapist, the piece unable to recognize letters in his or her own name. I've seen that happen many times. That unable to recognize rhyming patterns. Those are just some that stand out to me that I have seen many times. Some characteristics of dyslexia for students in kindergarten and first grade. When reading words such as puppy, the student might make no connection to the sound or the letters and just simply say the word dog. Does not understand the word that words come apart. So not understanding that words are created by letters or that words are made up of syllables. Complains about how hard reading is. Again, think about that history of reading problems in the family. Maybe the parent or maybe the sibling struggled. Trouble sounding out simple words such as cat, mat, and nap. I've even seen adults who could read large multisyllabic words, but then when they came upon words such as cat, mat, and nap, those are the ones that they had to stop and really process those sounds that those phonemes make in order to decode those words. In second grade through high school, very slow in acquiring reading skills. Reading is slow and awkward. Trouble reading unfamiliar words, often making wild guesses. I've seen this when working with middle school and high school kids too, getting to those longer words and simply making those wild guesses. Or having no strategy for reading new words. Definitely avoiding reading out loud, because these students, they're going to avoid reading and definitely avoiding reading out loud in front of others. Okay, for the area of supports, I'm going to hand the video back over to Laurie.
Okay. We are going to first look at the 5 language processing requirements of proficient reading and writing. And you see those here: phonological, orthographic, semantic, syntactic, and discourse. Jada reviewed the phonological component earlier when she was going over the definition. And so I will just review that it is the study of the speech sounds. Those are the phonemes, including the rules for combining and using those phonemes. The next is the orthographic, and in some situations you may hear it called morphology, but it's the study of the rules that govern how morphemes, the minimal meaningful units of language, are used in a language. And so you see here we have it broken down into spoken language and written language, because it's important for us to understand, you know, we start with the spoken language and then we move to written language. So first is the listening component. So understanding morphemes when listening, speaking, using morphemes correctly when speaking, and then reading, understanding grammar while reading, and then with writing, having that appropriate use of grammar when writing. Okay, syntactic or syntax. These are the rules that pertain to the ways in which words can be combined to form sentences in a language. So first, we understand the sentence structure elements when we're listening. Then we use correct sentence structure elements when speaking, understanding sentence structure while reading, and using correct sentence structure when writing. Semantics is the meaning of words and combinations of words in a language. And so, of course, we start with our listening vocabulary, then we move to speaking vocabulary, reading vocabulary, and then finally the writing vocabulary. Okay, discourse or pragmatics. These are the rules associated with the use of language in conversation in broader social situations. So first, understanding the social aspects of spoken language, including conversational exchanges, the social use of spoken language, including production of cohesive and relevant messages during conversations, understanding point of view and the needs of the audience while reading, and then conveying point of view and the intended message while writing. And so as we go through this session, you will hear, we are providing what good readers and writers look like, but then also we'll be explaining how many of our students with dyslexia struggle in these areas. And so this is an area, especially even with the spoken language, where many of our students struggle. They struggle to get those thoughts out in that cohesive manner. So we'll discuss that a little bit further as we go through. So putting it all together, all 5 language processing requirements are necessary to become a proficient reader and writer. We need all of those working together. And the 5 basic language domains are part of a continuum which spans to higher order language skills such as discourse, and that's impacted by skills in the pragmatics domain. So here are just a few review questions. So what is the understanding of sentence structure when listening, speaking, reading, and writing? And so we've learned that that is syntax. And then what is the ability to identify and distinguish phonemes while listening, or the phonological awareness component? And we've learned that that's phonology. And then what is the meaning of words and combinations of words in a language? And that's semantics. Okay, so moving on to the next KPS standard, understanding that learning to read for most people requires explicit instruction. So by the time most children leave their preschool years and enter kindergarten, they've learned a lot about language. And because children have been learning language since birth, most are ready to move to the next step, and that's mastering conventional reading and writing. Children build on their language discoveries to become conventional readers and writers. Effective readers and writers recognize letters and words. They know how to follow those writing rules, and they know how to create meaning from text. And children develop in 4 interrelated areas. So we know that they develop with cognitive and language, physical, social, and emotional. Most children follow the same sequence and pattern for development at their own pace. So we know they follow the same sequence, but they're developing at their own pace. And that's why you may see, some toddlers that may be a little bit more advanced with their vocabulary than others that are their same age. Because even though they are developing the same sequence and pattern, they are going to develop at their own pace. Language skills are closely tied to and affected by cognitive, social, and emotional development. And so in a minute, we'll talk about environments and how environments can affect this. Children first learn to listen and speak, then use these and other skills to learn to read and write. Emerging literacy is the gradual, ongoing process of learning to understand and use language. Successful programs to promote children's reading and literacy development should be based on an understanding of child development and recent research on brain development and the natural ongoing process through which most young children acquire language skills and become readers and writers. And so here you just see an image of the brain, and what we have learned through functional MRIs is that our students develop differently. So if you take images of a student with dyslexia, and you will see where the brain is lighting up in different areas than a non-dyslexic student. And so what we've learned from these images is that we can physically change the brain. And so by providing those important interventions, those systematic instructional strategies, we're able to change the brain so students can become successful and they can learn the strategies to become fluent readers. So I'm just going to go over this Broca's area of the brain. It's located in the frontal cortex. That's where the plans are that process the speech by interacting with the temporal cortex, where sensory information is processed in the motor cortex. And that's where the control is for the movements of the mouth. And new neural circuits are established to link language and visual regions to become skilled at reading. And it really is fascinating. So if this is something that is interesting to you, I definitely encourage you to do some more research in this area because it really is fascinating to see those images of the brain as students become more successful readers. Okay, and so here we have Scarborough's rope, and it's important for us to understand the reciprocal relationships among phonemic awareness, decoding, word recognition, spelling, and vocabulary knowledge. And the thing to remember about the rope is it just is breaking down all of those skills that we need to become a skilled reader. So when we look at the breakdown of the language comprehension, and then we look at the breakdown of word recognition, and we see how all of that is braided together. And like it says, many strands are woven into skilled reading. We cannot just have one stand alone. They all work together. And this is such a great visual for that. An important component of beginning reading instruction is effectively teaching letters and sounds. Related to letter and sound knowledge are phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. And so with phonological awareness, that's the ability to hear and manipulate sounds in oral language. And phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate phonemes. And we know that phonemes are the smallest units of sound in oral language. And we'll give you some specific strategies that you can do with your students to help build this skill. And then alphabetic knowledge is the knowledge of individual letter names, sounds, and shapes. And then, of course, the alphabetic principle, that's the idea that letters and groups of letters represent the sounds of spoken language. Readers apply the alphabetic principle through phonics when they use their knowledge of the relationships between sounds and letters to read both familiar and unfamiliar words. And we know that working with students with dyslexia, we have to teach them those decoding strategies. So when they come to an unfamiliar word, they have the skills that they need to attack it and be able to read it fluently. Okay, so when teaching letter and sound knowledge, use a variety of approaches that encourage generalized understanding from the beginning. And so when we think about our early readers and where we should start with them, these are just some examples. So reading those alphabet books helps them to make that association between the printed letter and different images and different words that go with those letters. And then point out letters in print in the environment. And we know that many of our kindergarten classrooms and our pre-K rooms, they are very print rich, and it's for that very reason. We want them to see those letters and words around them. Talk about letters and their sounds when you encounter them in everyday activities. And so this may be when you're walking in the hallways, when you're going to the cafeteria. These are also things that you can share with parents, because a lot of times, you're in the car and, for my son, when he was in those preschool years, when he would see McDonald's, and when he saw that M, he knew that was McDonald's. And he quickly learned to recognize Walmart when we pulled into the parking lot. So just encouraging them to look around them and be aware of the print that is around them. And then provide opportunities to play with letter shapes and sounds. And this is when you can really bring in some manipulatives, clay and Play-Doh, and those chenille, instead of calling them pipe cleaners, those chenille rods, and helping them to see that by playing and manipulating, they can make the actual shapes of the letters. And then explicitly reference letter names and sounds when you're doing your shared reading and writing activities, making sure you're bringing them back to, okay, let's talk about this letter. And then use mnemonic devices and actions, and use student names. And I know a lot of kindergarten teachers do this, a lot of first grade teachers do this, where they will have the alphabet and they put the student names in alphabetic order. That's a great way to help students begin to recognize those letters. And we know a lot of our students with dyslexia, they struggle with knowing the letters in their own name. So this is just another activity that you can do to help reinforce that skill. And then explicitly teach, model, and emphasize sounds and letters. And that first word right there is key, explicitly teach. Our students need that. It's not going, some students, they're just going to soak those letters up and they're going to learn them quickly and automatically. But for a lot of our students, they're not going to have that same success. And so we need to teach it explicitly with a lot of modeling, and a lot of emphasizing the sounds and the letters. Okay, so going back to phonemic awareness, that refers to the specific ability to focus on and manipulate individual sounds, phonemes, in spoken words. Phonemes are the smallest units comprising of the spoken language, and phonemes combine to form syllables and words. So the word mat has 3 sounds, a, t. Acquiring phonemic awareness is important because it is the foundation for spelling and word recognition skills. So here are some characteristics that students may exhibit. They may not correctly complete blending activities. So if you ask the student to put these sounds together, k, I, k, they may struggle to put the word kick together. They may not correctly complete phoneme substitution activities. So if I ask them to change the in mate to cur, they may struggle with that. They may not be able to produce the word crate. They may have difficulty identifying how many syllables are in a word. And so that, like you see here, we have paper. That may take some explicit instruction on the teacher's part to make sure they can identify those separate syllables. And then they may also have difficulty with rhyming, syllabication, or spelling a new word by its sound. And so you see here, I just wrote down a couple of rhyming words, and many of our students, they will struggle with that basic skill. And so that's where, we come in as the teacher to provide them with that instruction and plenty of practice. So here are some ways to help. Play word and sound games. You can use a plastic counter to count each sound that you hear in a word. You may play simple rhyming. Give me a word that rhymes with go. They would say no. Or blending games. If I say, what word comes from d-a-g? What's the word? And they would say dog. Read books with plenty of rhymes and practice the alphabet by pointing out letters wherever you see them. Phonemic awareness is the foundation for learning to read and spell. Without the ability to hear sounds in words, phonemic awareness and phonics cannot engage in this reciprocal relationship. Students must understand that words are made up of individual sounds that can be blended, segmented, manipulated. If students can do this, they can transfer these skills to print so they can read and spell more words. And this is why this step is so important, because phonemic awareness is all oral, it's all auditory. So there are no physical letters attached to it. So we want them to be able to manipulate those sounds and hear those sounds, isolate those sounds. So then when we attach it to print, they will be able to do that more successfully. Okay, so let's take a minute and look at your session 1 handout. And we're on the letter D. What foundational skill is necessary for learning to read and write? Think about those foundational skills. So would it be decoding, the alphabetic principle, or phonemic awareness? Take a minute and circle your answer. Okay, so let's move on to KPS 1.4. Identify and explain aspects of cognition and behavior that affect reading and writing development. Okay, so when we look at our cognitive behaviors, there are specific behaviors that may be observed in the classroom. And so you see here we have the behaviors listed and some observations that you may see. So first, when we think about attention, and that's the failure to focus on important stimuli in the classroom. The teacher may be lecturing, they may struggle to focus on their textbook, their reading assignment, or even when a classmate is talking to them. Automaticity, the failure to retrieve information quickly and automatically. And this is what you need to, do your basic life skills. What you need to walk, run, speak, read. We should be able to retrieve that automatically. And then executive function, that's the failure to manage life tasks such as organization, research, and self-control. And if you work with students, many of our students struggle with that executive function piece. Verbal memory, that's the failure to remember information that is verbally presented. Trouble with story recall and learning sequences of paired words. So that is a very important behavior for our students because we know we need that skill to be a successful reader. Processing speed is the failure to take in information, understand it, and then formulate an oral, written, or physical response. And then the graphomotor control, it's the disconnection between a child's thought and his or her ability to write them down. And that really affects a lot of our students with dyslexia. They may have the thought, but they struggle to get it down on paper, or even if it's just a simple assignment where you're having them copy from the board. They can see it on the board, but they struggle to get it on their paper. So here are some ways that it can impede their reading and writing development and some ways to address it. So first, let's look at attention. So the impact could be when a student is not able to focus on a task, it will impair his ability to learn. So we could provide students with a timer. Set the timer for small increments of time, and when the timer goes off, the student can take a short break. Automaticity. When a student cannot retrieve information automatically, it's going to slow down that learning process. So provide students with a word list and have them practice rereading those familiar words. This can also be completed with pictures for younger students. It could also be letters or numbers. It could even be colors on a page. We want to build up that automaticity for our students. Executive function. A student must be able to maintain self-control and organization to be successful in the classroom. So provide students with a detailed daily schedule and problem-solving steps or routines for the students to follow. And I know many of our teachers, as they work with older students, we want to say that they should be able to do this independently. And so as the classroom teacher, you may need to set the precedence at the beginning. Show them, explain the steps, practice that routine, and then pull that support back so they can do it independently. But for many of our students, they're going to need that explicit instruction of how to be organized. Even though they may be older, they may still need that specific guidance. Okay, so verbal memory. The impact would be when students struggle to remember information that is presented to them in class. They will not be able to complete assignments or remember information for their assessments. So we can give directions in multiple formats, teach students to use visual images, and give teacher-prepared handouts prior to the class lectures. That is a perfectly allowable accommodation. So the student has the handout, then they are able to listen, and then they can take additional notes in the margins while they're able to focus on you as you're providing the information. And then processing speed, the students need to have a quick processing speed so they can take the information and provide a response to the teacher or class. We don't want them to sit there and struggle as they're trying to find the words. So here is a way to address that. Offer instruction at a slower pace and check for understanding. Provide extended time and provide a copy of the teacher's notes. Our goal is for our students to feel successful and be successful in the classroom. So whatever we can do to provide that support is what we should do. And then finally, we have where some students will struggle to take the information they know and understand and transfer that to paper. So allow the student to write on a vertical surface. So maybe like a sticky paper on the wall is a strategy you can implement. You could also allow them to have a dictation program, maybe if it's on their laptop, or they can have a scribe. There are many ways that we can help support students in this area. Okay, let's look at our session handout. We are on letter E at the bottom. Think about a student that you've previously taught or you're currently teaching that exhibits one of these cognitive behaviors that we mentioned. So you can go ahead, pause the video, write down that student's name and a strategy that could be put in place to support that student. And if you don't want to write their name, you can write their initials. But this is just a good opportunity for you to think about that student, reflect, think about the behavior they exhibited and either a strategy that you used or a new strategy that you can put in place. Okay, KPS 1.5 is where we identify and explain how environmental, cultural, and social factors contribute to literacy development. So what research supports the findings that environmental factors play a role in the prediction of literacy outcomes? And so earlier I mentioned the home environment. That is the child's first environment, and it's the foundation for tremendous cognitive growth and development. Studies show that good readers who experience success are much more likely to have a favorable home environment. So we cannot discount that first environment for our students. Our school environment, of course, plays an important role. The students with reading problems do not read as much as students who are good readers. Many times these students do not have satisfactory relationships with the adults in the schools, and they may be perceived negatively by the teachers and principals. And we want our school environment to be that safe space for our students where it is a positive experience. And we know research shows that if they have that positive environment, they will be more successful. The social environment, many students with reading problems also have social difficulties. They typically have trouble making friends, interacting with others, and they may not always understand how to handle social situations. And so that's where we come in as the educator to help guide them through this and help them understand how to interact and handle those social situations. And then finally, the cultural environment. Many students come from homes with diverse backgrounds where English is not their first language. They are not proficient in understanding and using English. They may not be proficient in understanding and using their first language. So this can impact their overall literacy outcomes over time. So all of these different environments play a factor and they play a role in our students as they are learning to read. Okay, so there is also major research findings regarding the contribution of linguistic and cognitive factors to the prediction of literacy outcomes. So first, the linguistic factors. The linguistic abilities play a key role in predicting reading acquisition, and this has been found to be true in many studies in many languages. Previous studies identified letter knowledge to be a predictor of reading success, and a longitudinal study explored the prediction of reading abilities from age 3 to 16. And it found that semantic ability and interest in books at age 3 and phonological awareness at age 6 best predicted reading abilities at 16. Various cognitive abilities such as rapid automatic naming, or you may see it called RAN, and memory have been found to be a good predictor for successful reading acquisition, with several studies showing difficulties with RAN predicting reading difficulties. Research has found that children and adults with reading difficulties were found to have lower working memories, which is an efficient predictor of reading abilities. Preschool children who struggle with reading showed a significant difference in performance of working memory tasks than their grade normal peers. And remember, this is what we discussed earlier. We talked about that processing speed, and we talked about those working memory skills. And this is just research that supports that. And executive function can be used to predict future academic achievements. Studies have shown a correlation between a child's ability to regulate his behavior and thoughts and acquiring academic skills such as decoding, spelling, and numeracy. Executive functions have also been linked with pre-academic skills such as early literacy and math knowledge. An executive function, like reading, should be taught explicitly for some of our students. It's not a natural progression like it is in other areas. So many of our students are going to need specific instruction, even with those executive function skills like organization. So that's an important note for us to make as well. Okay, so refer back to your session 1 handout, and this is on the second page. Review that rapid automatic naming activity found on the handout, and it's in the top right-hand corner with the numbers. And take a minute and explain why it's important for our students to be able to name objects automatically and quickly. And feel free to pause the video if you want to have a discussion time with your peers. Okay, so this is the end of the first hour of session 1. So we are going to stop the recording now. We know many of you are listening to this in your grade level meetings, or you are listening to this in your professional development time. So we want to be able to give you that hour to take a break if you need to. So we're going to end this recording and we will pick up at KPS 1.7 at the beginning of the second hour.